What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to be talking about the role that open source is going to play in AI in 2025 and beyond. So, I think we need to create a foundation, and I think this foundation needs to be built upon where the current state of open source actually is without AI. And the simple fact of the matter is, there's literally a civil war going on. I know that sounds crazy. There's one side who supports the FSF and Richard Stallman and what he's trying to do, and the other side who's saying, yeah, we need to redefine what open source is. People care about open source now in a way they didn't before, and I think that's worth something. If you're part of these big projects that are against Richard Stallman, the FSF, you can count me out. I'm not in that camp. However, I also don't share all of his convictions. Meaning, I don't want to use a 14-year-old ThinkPad, do you? I mean, I get it. I get the turnoff. But what's the alternative? That there's no line drawn in the sand to tell you what open source software is or isn't. And this kind of comes to the issue of AI and open source. But before I get to that, I want to talk about a couple of open source projects that I absolutely love. One of my favorite projects of all times that's open source is VLC. I think this is probably the most successful open source project in history that I know of, and it's one that has stood the test of time, and I just absolutely love it. And I think pretty much anyone who uses a computer loves VLC. However, there are a lot of other great open source software programs out there that you can download on your computer and use. Like, for example, you have GIMP if you want to alter images and do that sort of thing. You have Kdenlive for editing video. That's what this video is going to be edited on. You have things like Ardour for recording music. You have great software that's free and open source, and there's many others that I didn't mention. I mean, what about LibreOffice? I actually prefer LibreOffice to Microsoft Office. There is a company that did it right back in the day. They were open source, and they took over the browser world. Many of you remember Netscape, and all of a sudden this free and open source product comes out called Firefox, and it literally took over the world. It spread like wildfire, and it seemed like they were pretty much invincible. Then one day, something happened. They failed to integrate to cell phone usage. They went from like 80% of the market share of browser users to less than 10%. The result of all of this has been kind of disastrous, if you ask me, because every move that they've made has been scrutinized by the open source community, and they've even succumbed to making conspiracy theories about them supporting woke agendas when in fact 2% of their annual revenue goes to charities that are rather innocuous in nature. But that said, they just can't win for losing, or can they? The last couple of years, they've started pivoting towards AI and an open source version of artificial intelligence. I want you to comment in the section below who you think is going to carry the torch for AI in 2025 and beyond, because right now, I have Mozilla Firefox in this category. Coming into 2025, I have this renewed sense of optimism. I don't know if I can use their browser quite yet, but I long for that day when I can use a browser that's not based on Chromium. I would love that. I've been using the personal home computer for 40 years. I remember the Apple IIc because that was my introduction. I was 8 years old, and there have been so many developments since then, and I can't begin to tell you just how great it has been to watch all the developments, and much of that is thanks to open source. The fact of the matter is, many of you don't remember that gridlock of closed source software and having to pay hundreds of dollars for each piece of software just to basically use your computer. So like you would shell out $2,500 for a new computer, then you would shell out hundreds of dollars for software. This was a reality in the 80s and the 90s. And a lot of you just don't remember that. And open source changed all that. And another thing that open source changed was the fact that it brought in would-be developers because they realized that they could write code too. Linux is the best thing that ever happened to the computer world. I just have to say, just like Jesus is probably the best thing to happen to this world. And I just have to say, when you threaten that, that's where I'm going to put up a big wall and say, no, I don't want that. And I think that some of these ideas of redefinitions and things like this threaten that. I don't think you should sleep on Mozilla Firefox. And I know I've been guilty of this. I just kind of ignored them for probably the last 5 or 6 years. And I was looking for a browser like 3 years ago, and I went to Firefox. I literally tried to use that browser, and they just didn't have the features, unfortunately. But I think that some of the new moves that they are making, they might make a huge comeback. And if they lead the way like I think they might, it might lead the way to projects like Kdenlive, for example, utilizing AI with video editing. And maybe they could have like some sort of subscription model to that or something like that that would generate money for open source. And I think that GIMP has started to do something very similar as well. And I'm just really excited for the future of open source in general. And I have to say AI has been a huge asset. But now I want to give you a stark warning. Now, I remember when the Berlin Wall came down. We all thought like any Soviet ambition or the Soviet Union was just completely demolished. It was one of the most hopeful moments of my life. Most of the world just felt this sense of hope. Then we found out, years later, that this Soviet ambition was still very much a reality. So here's my warning with Windows. Windows is the largest contributor to the Linux kernel, so you might think we won, right? But maybe they have their tentacles in certain areas of the Linux kernel, and all of a sudden, when we muddy up those waters of what open source is and redefine and everything else, and I would venture to bet a lot of the money that is behind this so-called push to redefine free software is probably being pushed by Microsoft themselves. And it makes me wonder if they ever went anywhere, if they still have closed source ambitions. And I don't know to what degree. Maybe they won't go fully closed source like they were before, but they could muddy up the waters just enough that it would kind of keep them relevant. Again, though, I'm not sure about that because part of me thinks that the Windows operating system will probably cease to exist. And I think after 12 or Windows 12 or 13, I think that Windows is just going to kind of go by the wayside. I don't think Windows is going to exist. Microsoft will exist. But that's another topic for a different day. But the warning is I don't think that Microsoft has benevolent intentions. And I don't think a lot of these corporations who are pushing proprietary solutions to AI have good intentions either. So we definitely need someone who will pick up the mantle and say, yes, AI should be open source. Mozilla Firefox seems to be the first big company to basically do that. My hats are off to it. Be sure to check out my video on why I thought it was a good idea that Linus Torvalds remove the maintainers from the Linux kernel development, and You can always binge watch my stuff. Be on the lookout for my deep dive into open source software. I'm going to talk about both sides, both the people who are for the FSF and against it. Be on the lookout for that video. And as always, just have a great day. Peace, guys.